Today we look at players that were superstars or at least near stars on one team, but got traded to another and instantly fell off and got worse. And a guy like Allen Iverson's actually the perfect example. You see, of course he built his name and his Hall of Fame career on the 76ers. We all know how great he was and what he did for that team. Well, then he gets traded to the Denver Nuggets, but there he teams up with Carmelo Anthony and still averages 25-7 and proves to the whole world that he's still one of the best players in the league without a doubt. And it actually wasn't until he got moved to the Detroit Pistons in 2008 that he really fell off. He just came off of a great year for the Nuggets, playing 42 minutes a night and playing like a superstar in 2007. So you can't tell me that his game just completely fell off 1 year later, leading to him now only putting up 17-4 in 2008. And it wasn't that. He could still physically play at the highest level, but his attitude and constant problems with coaches finally took a major toll on his career. And it was why he never recovered afterwards. And at only 33 years old, it's a shame things turned out that way when he probably still had so much left to offer. But it's crazy because Scottie Pippen was also 33 years old when his career took a major turn too, because that was the age he was when the 90s Chicago Bulls eventually broke up, leading to him getting traded to the Houston Rockets. And this is the guy that just helped the Chicago Bulls to their second three-peat, the guy that was Michael Jordan's right-hand man through 6 titles. And even when he played those 2 years without MJ, he was getting MVP votes for leading his team in every statistical category and averaging 22, 8, 5, and 3 for 2 straight seasons. So Jordan retires and he joins the Rockets, and even though he was now playing 40 minutes a night, which was 4th in the NBA, he was only averaging 14.5 points per game on the worst shooting numbers of his career. The Rockets then got swept in the first round and Scottie requested a trade. And sure, you could say, well, he just wasn't a good fit alongside Barkley and Olajuwon. But you could also look at the next 4 years of his career for the Trailblazers and see that things didn't get any better. They actually just got worse. I mean, sure, he was still dominant defensively and had some good outings on his new team, but he wasn't the same dude he was for the Bulls. And it was weird because a player like Pippen should fit perfectly onto any team he's on, but he was always a step behind the Bulls Scottie. Then of course Dwight Howard's another guy that got moved and fell off. He put up a Hall of Fame worthy career in Orlando, gets moved to the Lakers, and instantly right away everyone agrees he was just never the same. I mean, his stats on the court didn't fall off a ton when joining a guy like Kobe Bryant, but you could just tell he was completely different. And then the excuses came in. First, it was that he had just had back surgery and he came back too soon, and he didn't get to work out in the off season. And then as the season went on, it was just that he wasn't a good fit on the new team. But eventually the excuses ran out, and the fact that he was no longer a dominant player was completely on him. As he joined new team after new team, he just never went back to his Magic days. I mean, it's not like the back surgery had career lasting effects either. We've seen plenty of guys have back surgery and come back fine in a year or two. Who knows, maybe the Orlando Magic situation was just one of those where he was the perfect fit in that style and system. But while we're speaking of the Los Angeles Lakers, I think it's only right to mention the one guy that instantly fell off due to not even getting traded at all. You see, Lamar Odom was originally one of the pieces in the Chris Paul deal, and once that fell through, he felt so betrayed and hurt that they tried to trade him that he now requested to be traded anywhere else. Well, that just so happened to be to the Dallas Mavericks, where not only his career but the man's entire life kind of publicly fell off a cliff. I mean, that failed trade was really the main catalyst to a lot of things going downhill for him, and I saw him now come off the bench and put up career lows across the boards in points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals, and field goal percentage. And at one point, Mark Cuban even questioned his commitment to basketball in the middle of a game. So he left that team and played one more season for the Clippers the next year, and things got even worse, which pretty much ended his career from there on out. I feel like I just talked about the Isaiah Thomas situation recently, but we all know how he completely fell off after the Celtics traded him, and his career ended pretty quickly after. I just wanted to give it a mention, but not spend too long there. I think we do have to talk about another point guard though, who instantly fell off in Kemba Walker. Kemba did his thing on the Charlotte Hornets for 8 long years, and he was a guy who continuously got better every single season. It never really mattered too much though, because he was on the Hornets. In his time there, they only made the playoffs twice and never made it out of the first round. His last few seasons in Charlotte though saw him putting up 23-5 a night and making all-star teams. Personally, I remember seeing right through this. He was a 5'10" point guard, was only getting 5 assists a game, and finishing with a losing record every year. He probably shouldn't have been an all-star and may have tricked a few people into thinking he was better than he was, with some of those people being the Boston Celtics, seeing that they gave him $35 million a year in a new contract. But it wasn't long after that the Celtics realized they didn't like his game and traded him for Al Horford. He then found his way onto the New York Knicks, who decided to bench him for the season after only about 30 games. And we're talking about the Knicks, who had no real other point guard at the time. So I think his game really got exposed once he wasn't on the Hornets anymore. And he fell off big time with him not even being in the NBA anymore just 4 years after the initial trade. DeMar DeRozan was another guy who fell off after getting traded. I mean, just look at what happened to him on the Spurs. As you'll remember, he became the guy on the Toronto Raptors, making the All-Star team 4 times and averaging 27 points a game at his best. He was a 20+ point per game scorer consistently and thought to be one of the best shooting guards in the league, seeing how he was able to help his team to the best record in the East on multiple occasions. But then he gets traded to the San Antonio Spurs and everything changed. You see, this was the Spurs timeline. 2017, Kawhi Leonard was fully healthy. 2018, Kawhi Leonard doesn't play at all. 2019, DeMar gets moved to the Spurs. Well, here's how things worked out. With Kawhi leading the way, the Spurs went 61-21. The year he sat out the entire season, they finished 47-35. Then the year they added DeMar to play with those same role players that just finished 47-35 on their own, they now went 48-34. So adding DeRozan added 1 win to this team. While on the other hand, Kawhi led DeMar's team to an NBA championship, which really gave DeRozan a terrible look, especially since in 2019 the Spurs played even worse and missed the postseason. Sure, he's redeemed himself since then, but after leaving the Raptors, DeMar DeRozan's game definitely got a little bit exposed. Another one that may be controversial was that of Russell Westbrook, because on the OKC Thunder he was MVP and considered to be making his mark as one of the best players in NBA history. But once he was moved to the Houston Rockets, it was the beginning of the end. He didn't work out great with James Harden, which wasn't good, but it was okay because he still averaged 27, 7, and 7. Some could argue he fell off a little bit. Then he moved to the Wizards and didn't mesh well with Bradley Beal. He averaged 22, 11, and 11, but Washington finished with a losing record. Some could argue he fell off a little bit more. Then he ruined the Lakers for that one season and didn't mesh well with them either. So it was finally safe to say that he had either fallen off or just didn't play good outside of OKC and got exposed. Because once he eventually signed with the Clippers, there was no debating that he wasn't the same. I've gone into details many times about why he never worked out on other teams, so I'll save you on the details this time. Of course though, Ben Simmons is always another name that comes up in terms of current guys who fell off, and for good reason. It's just not too common for it to happen at only 26 years old. It was all his own doing though, and it was really because of the passed up dunk. Sure, he's done interviews and made comments about why it was a mistake that he passed it up, and when the team turned their back on him after he cost them that game, his confidence was now at an all-time low, which led to the holdout, which led to the trade to Brooklyn, and he couldn't have played any worse there. Sure, he had a back surgery and an apparent back injury that still existed, so we'll see this year if the whole trade situation caused him to fall off or if it was just temporary. As for a guy like Lance Stephenson, well, his fall off definitely wasn't temporary, because once he left the Indiana Pacers, he was never the same player. With Paul George and Roy Hibbert, over a 4-year span, he had slowly emerged into a third option and a real threat on that team. He was a perfect fit in that role and was showing signs that he was getting better every year. Well, then he took slightly more money to leave the team to the Hornets, and that right there was his mistake. He was instantly moved to the bench, his numbers took a big drop, and over the course of the next 3 years, he was tossed around 5 different teams before ending back up in Indiana. And by that point, the Pacers had a whole new team dynamic, so it wasn't the same, and it's why Lance never returned to that near all-star form, and also why he's currently out of the NBA. Joakim Noah is another guy that's also been out of the league for years at this point, and technically he really doesn't count because his fall off actually took place before he was traded away from the Bulls. And it was strange, he won the Defensive Player of the Year and was an all-star in 2014. Then the next year his numbers dropped dramatically, but that was only because the team brought in Pau Gasol to help him in the front court, and that was fine. But then the next year he lost his starting spot to Nikola Mirotic, and that's what was the beginning of the end for him, because he then signed a massive deal for the Knicks in the offseason, and it went so terribly that he's now known as the guy who had the worst contract in NBA history and never played another NBA game again after the contract was over. I mean, the fact that he averaged about 4 and 4 over the 4-year span and played a total of 100 games will do it to you. Then finally, there's the odd case of Darren Williams, who was an all-star and one of the most elite point guards in the league during his time in Utah. And the New Jersey Nets had high hopes for him when they brought him in off a trade. And his first year was promising when he continued on that same all-star pace. But then he kind of started falling off and things never got better, because just 2 years later his numbers took a massive hit and he went from playing like a superstar to a decent starter at best. He was only 30 years old, but the decline kept happening, and it was just 2 years later that he was out of the NBA entirely. And it was confidence issues that halted his career. It doesn't get talked about a ton, but a guy like Ben Simmons proves that confidence is huge. Darren Williams said that he had so many small nagging injuries that kept putting him in and out of games, and right when he would get back into a rhythm, he'd get injured again, which would make him doubt himself and his game and how well he could play, which on paper makes this one of the most mysterious fall-offs we've ever seen from a young player who had such a bright future. But when you actually look into all the details, it makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you next time.